You ever notice how, when you're talking to someone about cars these days, the conversation almost never gets around to what's under the hood? Like, think about it. Maybe a decade or two ago, if you were chatting with a friend about a new car, the first thing they'd say is, "Oh, it's got a V8," or "This thing's got turbo," or "Man, listen to that engine growl." But now it's all about, does it have CarPlay? How's the backup camera? What's the range on that thing? Can I charge my phone wirelessly? It's almost like the engine, that beating heart of the car, has faded into the background, replaced by screens and features and honestly just the general vibe of the car. Something caught my attention recently that really put this shift into perspective. I was reading about Ford. Yeah, that Ford, the one with the blue oval, the F-150s, the Mustangs, the whole American car legacy. And one of their top execs, John Lawler, basically said, look, people don't care about engines anymore. And I thought, wait, what? Ford is saying this? I mean, this is the company that built its reputation on engines, on muscle, on the kind of cars you could hear coming from a block away. For them to come out and say engines are the main thing people care about now? That's wild. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. And honestly, it got me thinking about how much the world has changed. Not just with cars, but with how we look at the stuff we buy, the things we use every day. So let's dig into this, because I think it says a lot about where we're headed, not just as car buyers, but as people living in this crazy, fast-changing world. But before I get too deep into this rabbit hole, if you're into this kind of conversation, if you like hearing about the weird ways the world is shifting, or you just want to keep up with what's really going on behind the headlines, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I promise it's worth sticking around for. All right, so back to Ford. Here's the deal. John Lawler, who's basically one of the top people running the show over there, came out and said that today's car buyers just don't care about what's powering their cars the way they used to. He literally said, I don't think that consumers really think about powertrains the way they did 30 years ago, where it defined what a vehicle was, the horsepower, the displacement, the torque, and everything about the vehicle. I think a lot of that is gone. And you know what? He's not wrong. Let's rewind a bit.
If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, or even the early 2000s, you probably remember a time when cars were all about what was under the hood. People would pop the hood at car meets, show off their engines, talk about mods, brag about horsepower. The engine was the soul of the car. It was the thing that made your car yours, that separated a Mustang from a Camaro or a Civic from an Accord. Even if you weren't a gearhead, you still knew that the engine mattered. But somewhere along the way, things started to shift. Maybe it was the rise of hybrids or the slow march toward electric cars. Maybe it was just the fact that cars got so much better, so much more reliable, that the engine became less of a worry and more of a given. Or maybe it's just that people's lives got busier, and the car became less of a passion project and more of a tool, something to get you from point A to point B with as little hassle as possible. Ford's not the only one noticing this. Across the industry, you're seeing the same thing. Car companies are spending less time and money developing new engines and more time cramming their cars full of tech, screens, sensors, driver assists, all that stuff. And it's not just because they think it's cool, it's because that's what people are asking for. When someone walks into a dealership now, they're not saying, tell me about the engine. They're saying, can I connect my phone? How many cup holders does it have? Does it have heated seats? The priorities have shifted, big time. And Ford's response to this is pretty fascinating. They're basically saying, if people don't care about engines, why should we spend a ton of money building our own? So now they're looking at outsourcing their engines and transmissions, maybe even buying them from other companies, including some in China. That's a huge shift. I mean, think about it. For decades, the pride of American car companies was building their own engines, their own transmissions, their own everything. It was about craftsmanship, about legacy. Now it's about efficiency, about cost, about giving people what they actually want. And honestly, I get it. Cars have kind of become like appliances. I know that sounds weird, but hear me out. When you buy a fridge or a washing machine, you don't really care who made the motor inside. You care about how cold it gets, how much it holds, how quiet it runs. The details of the motor, that's for the engineers to worry about. For you, it's just, does it work? Does it do what I need? That's what cars are becoming for a lot of people.
They're white goods, big, expensive, rolling appliances that get you where you need to go and make your life a little easier along the way. Now, I know there are people out there, maybe even some of you listening, who are screaming at your phones right now, but the engine is the best part. That's what makes a car a car. And I hear you, I really do. There's a whole world of car enthusiasts who live for the sound of a revving engine, who can tell you the difference between a flat 6 and a V8 just by the way it sounds. For those folks, this shift probably feels like the end of an era. And in a way, it is. But here's the thing. Most people aren't car enthusiasts. Most people just want something that works, that's reliable, that doesn't break the bank. And if that means the engine comes from a factory in China instead of Detroit, or that it's electric instead of gas, or that it's just a black box that nobody ever thinks about, well, so be it. The world moves on. Let's talk about why this is happening. Part of it is definitely the rise of electric cars. When you drive an EV, the engine, or technically the motor, is almost invisible. There's no noise, no shifting, no drama. You just push the pedal and it goes. For a lot of people, that's amazing. It's smooth, it's quiet, it's easy. But it also means that the thing that used to make cars unique, the engine, isn't really a thing anymore. Every EV kind of feels the same, at least in terms of how it moves. The differences are in the range, the features, the design, not in the engine. And then there's the cost. Building engines is expensive. Developing a new engine from scratch takes years and costs billions of dollars. If people aren't going to pay extra for a special engine, why bother? That's what Ford is thinking. If you can buy a perfectly good engine from someone else, slap it in your car, and nobody cares, that's a win. You save money, you get to focus on the stuff people actually care about, like tech and design, and you stay competitive in a market that's getting tougher every year. But it's not just about saving money. It's also about partnerships. Car companies are teaming up more than ever before, sharing technology, sharing parts, even sharing factories. Look at what Renault and Geely are doing with their horsepower train joint venture. They're pooling their resources to build engines together, because it just doesn't make sense to go it alone anymore. The days of every company building everything in-house are over.
It's all about collaboration, about finding efficiencies, about surviving in a world where margins are razor thin and competition is everywhere. Now, I want to pause for a second and talk about what this means for the future, because I think this is bigger than just cars. This is about how we think about the stuff we buy, the things we value. For a long time, we cared about the details. We wanted to know what made something special, what set it apart. But now, we're moving toward a world where the details don't matter as much as the experience. It's not about the engine, it's about how the car makes you feel, how easy it is to use, how well it fits into your life. And honestly, that's not a bad thing. It's just different. It's a shift from the technical to the experiential, from the nuts and bolts to the user interface, from what's under the hood to what's on the screen. And for most people, that's a good trade. Most people don't want to tinker with their cars. They just want them to work. But there's a flip side to this too. When everything becomes the same, when the engines are all sourced from the same factories, when the cars all have the same features, you lose something. You lose that sense of identity, that sense of pride. You lose the thing that makes a Mustang, or a Corvette. And for the people who care about that stuff, that's a real loss. It's kind of like music, you know? Back in the day, people cared about the instruments, about the amps, about the little details that made a band unique. Now, a lot of music is made on laptops, with the same software, the same samples, the same plugins. It still sounds good, but it's not the same. There's something missing, something human. So, where does this leave us? I think we're at a crossroads. On one hand, you've got the march of progress, cheaper, more efficient cars, packed with tech, designed to make life easier. On the other hand, you've got the loss of tradition, the fading of the things that made cars special. And honestly, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just the way things are. But let's bring it back to Ford for a second. For them, this isn't just a philosophical debate. It's a business decision. They're looking at the numbers, looking at what people are actually buying, and making the call. If engines don't matter to most buyers, let's stop spending so much time and money on them. Let's focus on what people care about: tech, comfort, convenience. And you know what? That's probably the smart move. The car business is brutal.
Margins are thin, competition is fierce, and the pace of change is insane. If you can save 30% on your costs by outsourcing engines, that's a huge deal. That's money you can put into better screens, better safety features, better design. That's how you stay alive in this business. But I can't help but feel a little nostalgic. There's something about the old way that's hard to let go of. the sound of a big V8, the feel of a manual transmission, the smell of gasoline on a cool morning. Those are things that stick with you. They're part of what made cars magical. And as we move into this new era, I hope we don't lose sight of that entirely. Maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe there's room for both, the practical, efficient cars that most people want, and the special enthusiast cars that keep the spirit alive. Maybe the future is a world where most cars are like appliances, but there's still a place for the weird, the wild, the wonderful. The cars that make your heart race, that make you smile every time you turn the key. Or maybe, as the world keeps changing, we'll find new things to get excited about. Maybe the thrill of driving will come from something else, autonomous features, crazy new designs, experiences we can't even imagine yet. Who knows? The only thing I'm sure of is that things are changing, and fast. So, next time you're talking to someone about cars, pay attention to what comes up. Is it the engine, or is it the tech, the features, the experience? Chances are, it's the latter. And that's not a bad thing. It's just different. It's a sign of the times, a reflection of what we value now. And hey, if you're one of those people who still cares about engines, who still gets a thrill from a perfectly tuned exhaust note, don't worry, you're not alone. There's a whole community out there keeping the flame alive. But for the rest of us, maybe it's time to embrace the new, to see cars for what they are, tools, companions, rolling pieces of technology that make our lives a little bit easier. At the end of the day, whether you care about engines or not, the important thing is that you get where you're going safely and comfortably. And if that means the engine is just another part, hidden away and forgotten, well, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's progress. So, yeah, Ford says car buyers don't care about engines anymore. And maybe they're right. Maybe we're all just looking for something that works, that fits into our lives, that makes things a little bit simpler. And if that's the future, I'm curious to see where it takes us.
And hey, if you enjoyed this little journey through the changing world of cars, don't forget to subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from, and I'd love to have you along for the ride.